The Sega Dreamcast turns 25 years old this year, and if you didn't know that, I'm sorry that you had to find out this way. We're both old as marbles. I got mine in 1999 at the age of 14, not the marbles, and it had so much of what I enjoyed about gaming as a 90s kid. Authentic arcade ports, Sonic the Hedgehog, and the world's most soft-moddable console since copying floppies. But if you were a JRPG fan, you probably felt a little abandoned. Sure, everyone raves about Skies of Arcadia, and it's a pretty good one to crow about, but the soon-to-release PlayStation 2 would have so many more role-playing games to offer. And you can't just play one game forever, right? Enter Sting, not him. Sting Entertainment, the developer behind quirky and experimental RPGs like Yggdra Union and Riviera the Promised Land, who had released two of their possibly least experimental games for Sega's Misfit toy. Evolution, the World of Sacred Device, is a traditional JRPG with some unconventional aspects, a Saturday morning cartoon aesthetic, and a short but extremely combat-heavy campaign. It can't and won't hold a candle to Skies. I don't even know why it would be holding a candle, they're not Ebenezer Scrooge, but it's not a joyless slog either. Sorta. You play as Mag Launcher, and already the names are crazy and great. Your butler's name is Grenade, your rival's name is Chain Gun. I love a game that fully commits to a bit. The Launcher family is renowned for adventuring, but Mag's father has gone missing, and the family has gone into considerable debt. So Mag and his friends are going to have to go dungeon diving for treasure and relics to pay it off, while also dealing with the 8th Imperial Army and Prince Eugene, a man who exudes devastating slimeball energy and enjoys himself a good goose step, as they seek the lost ultimate power of Evolutia. So, nothing in this plot has dire urgency until the very end. It's a silly, cartoony plot, but it does have a gameplay component to it. Each time you return to the town hub, you'll have an opportunity to pay into the debt at the Adventurer Society, which is where you plan your daily trips into the ruins. You can tackle these ruins in any order, but once you choose one, you'll be locked into it until you clear all of the floors and fight that ruin's boss. But the game is not antagonistic to you and offers teleporters every few floors to whisk you back to town, so you can sell old gear, restock on items, and upgrade your stuff. Then you just hop back on your plane and you can re-enter the ruin just 2 floors away from where you left. The dungeon crawling itself is fairly simple, a series of randomly generated floors that connect small boxy rooms with thin hallways. This was sort of a staple of a certain era of RPG that I don't particularly miss, as handcrafted dungeons are far more interesting and memorable, but the random approach kind of makes sense, since you make multiple trips and the amount of floors increase as you clear each ruin. However, that does mean a lot of samey feeling exploration with only mild visual differences, and lots of combat. Battles take place on a 3x6 grid, and positioning determines damage to and against, with a few exceptions. There are some skills that can push or pull enemies on the grid, but truth be told, I didn't use them often, as I preferred a high DPS strategy. Coupled with elemental weaknesses and a need to reserve your mana, and there is a decent amount of planning per battle that keeps it from becoming completely brainless, despite the seemingly never-ending amount of encounters you get into. It's not that there's a high encounter rate, as enemies are on the field to run into, but that you'll want to engage with many of them to keep up with the curve. While enemies scale to Mag's level, they increase in level on each new floor. So you can't just beeline to the end of the dungeon without getting your ass kicked. There's also another reason to fight these monsters, as defeating enemies grants you skill points to allocate toward new abilities on your Psy-frame, the metal exosuit several characters are wearing. You can add slots to these Psy-frames outside of dungeons and equip new mechanical components which offer their own unique skills, and upgrade those parts to lower their mana cost and increase their power. This gives a decent amount of flexibility to what would otherwise be a pretty restrictive RPG, as you can only change one of your party members for most of the story, and a couple of characters have a traditional weapon rather than a Psy-frame, though you can find better versions of those weapons in the dungeons. This does mean relying a little bit on luck, as treasure chests are randomly determined and could just as easily dump pointless items on you as it could new equipment or appraisal items, which could be taken back to the society to sell and sometimes turn into permanent stat buffs. It feels like a game that would have liked for you to spend countless hours on dungeon trips and town shopping, but there's just not enough content to justify that. My playthrough was about 12 hours long, and I can't imagine playing any longer than that and not getting bored. There's only mild enemy variety in the dungeons, and the one new bit of exploration comes at the very end when you're traversing a handcrafted battleship dungeon. You'll also want to play this in an emulator because combat animations, particularly the skills, can take a really long time to play out, and after a while, the turbo button is going to be your best friend. The localization of the game also could have been better.
Now then you have picked up.
It's not terrible, but it definitely has some lines of dialogue that seem mistranslated, which is a shame because Sting did try to put flavor throughout the game. To provide a couple of examples, there's a soldier that doesn't want you to enter his room, and he won't immediately fight you. If you choose to fight him, he'll retreat into his room and you can go in after him and beat him up again. If you do that, you'll find out that he was hiding a letter written to his fiancée about eagerly waiting to see her again and bringing a gift. Mag, you asshole! There's also this guy who sees his fellow soldiers get knocked out and decides to play dead himself, but you can keep poking him until he realizes it's not working and gets up to fight you. There's no reason to do these things, and you could easily miss them, but I appreciate that they're there. In the end, I think Evolution is a flawed but decent RPG experience if you've exhausted the other RPGs on the Dreamcast. It's simple and could be a nice entry point for a beginner, but you'll want to have something to snack on while you wait for combat animations to finish. While dungeon generation is incredibly plain, it's still fun to fully map out a floor, avoid traps, and sneak up on enemies to get initiative. I would not treat this like an Etrian Odyssey game and only go back to town if you absolutely need to, or it'll start to become a slog. There's a version of Evolution for the Gamecube that combines both games and significantly abbreviates the first one, so that might be the ideal way to play, but if your emulation device can't handle Gamecube emulation, the Dreamcast version won't ruin your life. It just isn't and shouldn't be the first game you play on there. Like, how about Power Stone? It's not an RPG, but it's pretty cool.